Imagine this, just moving 11 elephants halfway across the world. And it sets off this huge international storm, revealing so much about us and, well, how we see other living things.
It really does. It's this flashpoint, isn't it? Where conservation ideas and our, you know, deeply ingrained feelings about animals in captivity just collide.
And that's exactly what we're getting into today, using Thomas French's book, Zoo Story Life in the Garden of Captives, as our guide. It's this incredible behind-the-scenes look showing how human and animal lives get tangled up in these places.
Yeah, it's a really compelling read.
And our way of looking at it today, it's kind of inspired by channels like Mindful Moments over on YouTube. You know, they use AI to dig into books, sparking some really thoughtful reflection.
Right, encouraging that critical thinking aspect. So our aim here isn't just to summarize the story. It's more about uncovering maybe some surprising ideas about our whole connection with wildlife.
And the ethics, the big ethical questions around captivity and just the sheer emotional pull these animals have on us.
Exactly, those powerful feelings they bring out.
So let's start with that pivotal event the book details. Moving those 11 elephants from Swaziland all the way to zoos in Tampa and San Diego.
Okay. So the situation in Swaziland was, well, complicated. They actually had too many elephants for the land, which was causing environmental issues.
Right, impacting the ecosystem.
Precisely. And at the same time, finding other places in Africa to move them safely, that was getting harder and harder because of, well, poaching. It was a huge threat.
Which put the Riley family, who are managing wildlife there, in a terrible spot. They even had to consider culling the herd, didn't they?
They did. And the book makes it clear how much they hesitated. I mean, culling elephants generates such a strong negative public reaction. They looked at all sorts of options first.
Trying to avoid that outcome.
Absolutely. And that's when the zoos, San Diego and particularly Lowry Park in Tampa, came into the picture. They basically proposed taking the elephants.
Lowry Park was planning a big new elephant area around then, wasn't it?
That's right. So this seemed like a possible solution. The elephants wouldn't be culled, they'd get a new home, and it looked like a conservation partnership.
But actually moving them,
yeah,
the logistics must have been just immense.
Oh, incredible.
Yeah.
The book describes it vividly. They had to tranquilize, I think it was 13 elephants initially, all at once from a helicopter to try and keep stress down.
Wow. All at once.
Yeah. Then they selected the 11, moved them into a holding area, a boma, then onto trucks for this long drive to the airport. But the local airport couldn't handle a big 747.
So another step.
Right. First onto two smaller Russian planes, Ilyushin IL-16s, I believe, to fly them to Johannesburg. Then finally transferred onto the 747 for the flight over the Atlantic. And it was freezing cold in Johannesburg at the time, winter, adding yet another challenge.
And all of this happening while animal rights groups were raising major objections.
Definitely. Groups like Born Free, PETA, they're very vocal. Protests, lawsuits, trying to stop the whole thing. They fundamentally objected to taking wild elephants for zoo.
It really highlights that deep ethical divide.
It does. And the arrival in Tampa, it was almost cloak and dagger, wasn't it?
Yeah, the book mentions police escorts, even the FBI being involved. Because of threats.
That's what it says. Intelligence about potential sabotage. So the zoo kept the arrival time and details completely under wraps, which, just shows how high the stakes felt, how intense the feelings were around these specific animals.
It really sets the scene for just how emotionally charged everything is inside the zoo walls. Now, thinking about daily life there's that story about a guide calling an elephant naughty. That really stood out to me.
Oh, that's such a perfect example of, anthropomorphism, isn't it?
Right.
The guide sees the elephant blocking the tram pass and interprets it as playful, like it has a sense of humor, wanting attention, wanting people to listen.
Injecting human motives onto it.
Exactly. But then, almost immediately, the book contrasts that with the story of a park worker on a bike who got seriously hurt by a mother elephant just protecting her calf.
A stark reminder.
Absolutely. It slams home the point that however much we relate to them or think we see ourselves in them, they are still powerful wild animals with instincts we have to respect.
The book also talks about how all the different animals ended up at Lowry Park and suggests this tells us a lot about ourselves.
Yeah, the author calls the zoo a kind of living catalog, not just of animals, but of human ideas, our fears, our obsessions, this weird mix of wanting to, put nature on a pedestal, but also control it.
So each animal's backstory reflects something about us.
In a way, yes. Where they came from, why they were removed from the wild. It ties into human history, politics, money. The zoo ends up being like a mirror, reflecting our own messy, contradictory attitudes about nature.
And keeping elephants specifically, that
Yeah.
brings up huge financial and ethical points.
Oh, definitely. Elephants are incredibly intelligent, intensely social. They need vast amounts of space. Trying to meet those needs in captivity is, well, extremely difficult and very expensive.
And the whole idea of taking them from the wild in the first place.
Even with conservation justifications, like in the Swaziland case, it's still deeply controversial within the zoo world itself, and certainly with the public. It forces you to ask these really hard questions. Does the educational value, the potential conservation benefit, justify taking an animal's freedom? What does good care even mean for a species like this?
It's interesting, too, how Lowry Park itself changed over time. It wasn't always focused on conservation.
No, the book mentions its origins as Fairyland Zoo. Can you imagine? Storybook themes, apparently an elephant named Sheena giving rides. A very different era compared to the modern zoo like Salisbury was trying to build, focusing more on, natural habitats and conservation messages.
And people are just drawn to those big, impressive animals, aren't they? The charismatic megafauna, as the book calls them.
Absolutely. Elephants, tigers, apes.
Yeah.
We connect with them more easily, perhaps. We see things in their behavior, their family groups maybe, that remind us of ourselves, so we get more emotionally invested.
Like Herman the chimpanzee, his story is just heartbreaking in parts.
It really is. Taken from the wild as an infant, lived like a pet for years before coming to the zoo. He learned to interact with humans in very specific ways. He seemed to crave their attention, their approval.
And got distressed when he didn't get it.
Apparently so. It makes you think really hard about the inner lives of these captive animals and how much our presence shapes their existence.
Even the keepers, the book suggests, feel this tension.
Oh, for sure. Many of them form incredibly deep bonds with the animals. They love them, but at the same time, they wrestle with the basic morality of captivity. The book mentions this sort of quiet unease among some keepers when the Swaziland elephants arrived. That conflict is real.
And there are different viewpoints even within the staff, right? Some get very attached, others keep more distance.
Exactly. It describes this spectrum. You have the bunny huggers, as some apparently call them, who name the animals, maybe talk to them like people, and then others, maybe in the reptile department, the non-bunny huggers, who maintain a more scientific detachment. Creates interesting dynamics, I imagine.
The book is unflinching, though. It includes really difficult events like Tatiana the Siberian tiger escaping.
Yes, that was a truly awful incident, and a brutal reminder of the risks involved in keeping large predators. The investigation afterwards found, significant safety failures at that particular zoo, San Francisco Zoo. Though the book focuses on Lowry Park, this incident is mentioned for context. It really shook public confidence and forced zoos everywhere to re-examine their safety measures.
And then there are those bizarre, disturbing cases of people actually climbing into enclosures.
Yeah, the book touches on that too. The reasons are often complex, psychological.
Yeah.
But it just highlights the dangers when that barrier between humans and wild animals breaks down.
And the death of Charlie Torre, the young elephant trainer killed by Tilly, that had huge repercussions for elephant handling.
It did. A terrible tragedy. Her death was a major catalyst in the shift toward what's called protected contact management for elephants, basically keeping a barrier between the keeper and the elephant at all times.
Because free contact was just too risky.
It acknowledged the inherent danger. Even with elephants raised around humans, their size, their power, their potential unpredictability, safety had to come first for everyone involved.
So, back to the Swaziland elephants arriving at Lowry Park. That initial period must have been crucial.
Very much so. They had to adjust to a completely new environment, new routines, new keepers, and each elephant had its own personality, its own way of coping. Brian French, the elephant manager there, poured himself into their care.
And Ellie, the Asian elephant already there, but she was wary at first.
Yes, apparently quite apprehensive. These were African elephants, different species, different social cues, maybe even different ways of communicating that she didn't recognize initially.
The book mentions they use something called the elephant restraint device, the hugger, for checkups.
Right. It's a piece of equipment designed to hold an elephant relatively still and safely so vets and keepers can perform necessary health checks, foot care, that sort of thing. It's about safety for both the animal and the staff.
And they were trying complex procedures, too, like artificially inseminating Ellie, bringing in specialists.
Yes, from Berlin, I think.
Right.
It shows the level of scientific effort that goes into managing captive populations now. Trying to breed endangered species, maintain genetic diversity.
Yeah.
It often requires these kinds of advanced techniques.
But it's not all struggle and controversy. The book does highlight conservation wins, like Stormy the manatee.
Yes. Stormy's story is a great example of the positive side. Rescued, rehabilitated at the zoo's manatee hospital, and then successfully released back into the wild. That's the kind of direct conservation impact zoos strive for.
Still, it's not always straightforward, like trying to get the Sumatran tigers and Shala and Eric to breed.
Right. That illustrates the challenges. You can set up the perfect conditions, but animal behavior, instinct, individual compatibility, it's complicated. The keepers tried all sorts of things, but it wasn't happening easily.
Leanne Rotman, the chimp keeper, her connection sounds incredibly deep.
It does. Her insights into their social world, her understanding of the individuals, it really emphasizes the strong bonds that can form, especially with primates. And she had her own theories about Herman's death later on.
Right. And Ellie, the elephant, eventually did have a calf, Tamani, though there were some early worries.
Yes, initially some difficulty with the mother-calf bond, which can happen, but they worked through it, and Tamani's birth was obviously a huge moment for the zoo's elephant program.
Then Herman the chimp passed away. That must have resonated deeply within the zoo.
It seems so. He'd been there so long, such a fixture. His death brought up reflections on his life, the troop's dynamics, those human connections he'd formed. Different people saw his passing in different ways, it sounds like.
But the conservation work continued,
Okay.
right? Manatees, hatching rare birds.
Yeah, the manatee rescue program kept going, and they had success hatching a shoebill stork chick, which is apparently quite difficult.
Right.
It shows that broader commitment beyond just the big name animals.
The book also mentions this idea of zoo time, how time flows differently for the animals.
It's a really interesting concept, the idea that the rhythm of life in the zoo isn't our human clock-driven time. It's different for different species. Watching the lorikeets flitting around or the slow movements of the manatees, it gives you a sense of these other tempos, other ways of experiencing time.
So when you step back, Zoo Story really paints this incredibly intricate picture. You've got the conservation efforts, some successful, some challenging. You see these complex animal behaviors. And always these underlying ethical questions about captivity.
Absolutely. And how tangled human and animal lives become in these places. It really makes you think, doesn't it? About our role, our responsibilities, how we perceive these creatures.
It definitely pushes you to look beyond the surface. It encourages that deeper thinking, considering all the different angles.
Which is so important.
And for more explorations like this, delving into complex topics, we definitely recommend checking out resources like Mindful Moments on YouTube and, of course, our own podcasts here.
Yeah, there's always more to uncover and think about in these kinds of stories.
So we really encourage you, if this sparked your interest, subscribe to our podcast for more discussions like this one. Maybe share it with someone you think would find it interesting.
And if you want the full story, consider grabbing the book, Zoo Story. We'll put a link in the show notes.
Definitely. But most importantly, just keep thinking critically about the world around us, our relationship with nature, and, well, our place in it all.